Hello and welcome. This is the first and the only magazine show with the latest news and information from the UK energy scene. Oil or diesel, wind or solar. It's all here in the next 30 minutes. And on the show this week, as an American peace plan emerges between Ukraine and Russia, global crude prices fall. Is this a blip or the start of cheaper oil for all? In France, a huge reservoir of white hydrogen is discovered. But will recovery and deployment costs outweigh any benefit from potential savings? And the verdict on COP30. More hot air than real-world policy? With the words fossil fuels barely mentioned, did any roadmap emerge to allow poorer countries to move to a carbon-free future? All that's to happen in the next few minutes. Joining me to discuss this week's events, Greg Newman, Chief Executive Officer of Onyx Capital Group, and Julian Keites at Flux Markets. Welcome to you. So let's get straight into the idea of prospect of peace. The war between Ukraine and Russia might be moving to its final chapter, but it has had a real-world impact, hasn't it? What have you seen on the screens?
Yeah, it's been, well, first we need to give the context that only a couple of weeks ago we were thinking this was going to cause a skyrocketing in prices. The market has seemed to think that they believe when Trump was renewing these conversations about trying to put pressure Ukraine to come with a peace deal, that actually that was going to happen, which surprised me personally and us here. So the market's reacted by selling, and the prices are actually quite a bit lower than they were on the just a couple of weeks ago. And there's a bit of panic out there. Do we need to unload everything? And the producers who produce a lot of oil, there's quite a lot of hedging going on. It all kind of makes sense. We're thinking that if the sanctions are withdrawn, which with Trump, these kind of things can be overnight, even though I said it probably won't be. I think
it's literally on a whim, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's impressive in a way because as in, usually you expect an agreement to be just decades. I mean, look at the Brexit bill, look at these things, they take so long. But with this, he's very clearly said, at least in the original 28-point plan, if this is agreed, it doesn't have to be implemented. It just needs to be agreed, and I'll remove the sanctions, which really is a trigger that suddenly there's 1 billion barrels of oil on the water right now. Now, that's not all oil that's just sitting there. There's a lot just transiting, but quite a lot of it, at least a few 100 million barrels worth, is just there sanctioned and not being able to go anywhere. So if the sanctions are pulled away, bang, it has to go find a home. And if people remember COVID and we had negative oil prices, it's not unheard of that could happen again, because there's just so much in the spot market that would become immediately available. So it could be a complete capitulation of oil prices, but it's very we've got kind of forecasts that could be 75 plus oil with if sanctions get tightened and everything unwinds, all the way down to $30 and below. So it's a really crazy interpretation of the market right now.
Well, it's interesting because JP Morgan put out a report saying that we might see global oil at around $30 a barrel. Yes. What was their reasoning, Julian?
They said they were coming from the point of view of the course of the next 2 years. They were saying that there's been very healthy uptick in demand, about 1 million barrels, give or take. So demand's actually increasing, but actually supply is outpacing that demand, about 3 million barrels, according to their estimates. And particularly interestingly, focusing on, or one bit I picked up out of the report, they didn't necessarily just focus on that, is Argentina's oil shale, Vaca Muerta, which is relatively cheap to produce, cheaper than the US, and is very light and sweet, so it's very valuable crude.
Argentinian shale oil has been talked for a long time.
Yeah.
Their reserves are some of the biggest in the world, and they kind of
huge.
rival Saudi Arabia when you get to the deep shale reserves. So that has been like a long-term, if Argentina would be able to get this out, it could be a hugely significant thing, and it's finally starting to happen.
It is. It's about 500,000 barrels a day, isn't it, at the moment? It's ramped up from about 100,000.
Looking at Guyana as well, these places that suddenly commit to oil production, it could just really, really go up, and it comes back to
Brazil, Ghana,
Sea again. It could be happening in the North Sea if we wanted it to as well. But anyway, is that the base cases for them? They're
saying 30. For me, more really, I mean, predictions are predictions. They're invariably wrong, right? But I think for me, seeing 30 is a possibility. It's not, as you say, a complete capitulation, too much oil in the water. Maybe you do have a COVID type environment. But I think it's more likely, more reasonable, Ukraine aside and Russia, because I don't think we're out of the woods with that yet. Myself, I think seeing ourselves into the high 50s, low 50s is now.
It's pretty amazing. I think we just end with, we had 2022 and the cost of living crisis and energy prices seemingly the worst thing ever. It has finally flipped on its head and could flip all the way on its head quite aggressively to we've got way too much LNG, way too much gas. If the sanctions are released and things are flowing, we're just swarming with
all the bets are off, really, aren't they?
Well, it's great news for consumers, potentially.
Right.
Yes, it
now,
is.
I think a smaller order of magnitude, but nevertheless an interesting thing domestically, as we record this programme, we're just minutes away from the budget being announced. And it is thought that there might be an announcement tucked away there, either in the speech or maybe in the paperwork that emerges, is that some licences for North Sea exploration will be relaxed or existing fields can carry on exploration. Will that have a major impact, or is that a relatively small figure in your calculations?
In the oil market? Oh, very, very minimal. But it's good news for tax receipt perspective, and I guess the government is too tempting. But I think you're right. They will
jobs. Tax and jobs, right?
They'll bury it away, which I think
they're going to try and get it under the radar. If they approve it. Yeah,
we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we will. I did want to just come back on one point on the Ukraine situation as well. I don't know if that's, I think it's really important to think. For me, Zelensky's shown himself to be a very effective leader, very emotionally intelligent. So him saying he's agreeing to the deal is really to sort of flag up and pique Trump's interest to get him on side. Mm-hmm. But some of the detail of that 28-point plan and the revised plan, because it's now revised, that 28-point plan read like Russia had written it. Right.
No, but you're right, actually, because Ukraine then took it and it was like, this is not what we wanted to see, but they resisted the language of
they've said the minor details.
And Russia then said back again, well, we just need some clarification. So the language is pointing to.
So I'm not sure, because the war, it is pointing very positively. Let's hope it's all positive. They can resolve it. Absolutely. I wonder whether negotiations collapse. I don't think it'll be Zelensky or Trump. I think it's more likely to come from Russia, because they'll
just say no to any kind of concessions.
Yes. But we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Fingers
crossed. It could be happening. Okay.
Sorry.
Now then, next, news of a giant oil field. This is in France, but the excitement is not about oil. It's about hydrogen, white hydrogen. Early surveys around Focheville show pockets with about 20% hydrogen at a depth of about 1,250 metres. So let me understand. I need you to help me understand white hydrogen. And is that difficult to get out? Is that now doable? Could it be economic to explore that?
Why don't we start with, green hydrogen is how you produce hydrogen using electrolysis. You need a lot of power for that, electricity for that.
Very uneconomic.
Very uneconomic. Blue hydrogen is the oil industry's favourite because it produces
supports their industry.
Mostly byproduct from oil production, right? And it's used a lot in turbines for their refiners to generate electricity. For
and you sequester the carbon dioxide produced. By
fair enough. So you've got blue, you've got blue, green, and you've got brown hydrogen, which is more by coal.
And you've got grey, which is, again, from steam methane reforming, where you're not capturing the carbon emissions for heating up that methane. So white hydrogen, what's white? We've got all the colours under the rainbow here. White is naturally occurring hydrogen. Okay, so this is, if we think about, this is to do with water passing and filtering through radioactive rocks, slightly radioactive rocks. So if you go to Glasgow, if you go up to Aberdeen, there's a lot of radon gas, which is a radioactive gas, in the granite in the buildings there. Right. So you get naturally occurring radioactivity in rocks. So that radioactivity changes the water passing through the rock and splits it into hydrogen and oxygen naturally. And then that hydrogen's very light and it accumulates just like oil in traps. And this is what they found, what we call white hydrogen, naturally occurring or geological hydrogen. Key things here are, in terms of development and getting out of the ground, more or less, we know how to do this. We've been refining,
You can use similar techniques, can you?
You use the same techniques as oil, more or less, how you drill down for oil.
The flashpoint's a bit earlier. You can't have a drill bit.
There are definitely some issues there with that. But in terms of pure economic cost compared to green hydrogen, should be much cheaper. theoretically. And I think it's really important to say that this is pre-development stage.
Sure.
Is fine.
It's a bit of speculation.
There's a long way.
What are the use cases? Because it's not for regular you and me, it's not for domestic power. Is it industrial vehicles, that sort of thing, which might, if they can bring this white hydrogen in board, that's the use case for it, is it?
But like I said,
Good question.
for generating power for refineries, that's a well-known hydrogen cost.
Yeah, well, I think roughly 99%, most hydrogen is grey hydrogen produced at a refinery. And that's really the hydrogen you want to decarbonise. So this white hydrogen has no greenhouse gases associated with it.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no input cost other than pulling it out of the ground. Okay, so really it probably in my head should go and be transported to a refinery to minimise the amount of refinery steam methane reforming. So you're decarbonising that value chain.
I think the point is we need everything we can get, right? We need all the abundant energy we can get, especially if people want it to be renewable. This is just going to add to that mix. I think the big contest for hydrogen is for vehicles. It's just highly corrosive. It's easy to...
very difficult to distribute.
Yeah.
It's very, very, because you've got to compress it.
Small molecules and escape easily. There's loads and loads of issues. But as I said, the oil industry is hugely into it, really wants hydrogen to boom. It's quietened down the last couple of years about it.
It really has. To 2020, there was a big government to release it, was the new thing. Lots of subsidies issued. Actually, there still is a subsidy for hydrogen.
It's just the viability question. I think if, Elon Musk has actually been a big anti guy about hydrogen. You can't underestimate his impact, right? Because he actually did an April Fool's one day. The Americans don't really understand irony, right? So it was this April Fool's article that they were going to create a Tesla with hydrogen and you were going to get free water in there. And he was taking the piss, but I actually believed it when I saw it first. The point is that he's so like, look, this is just so not going to work. And I think he's been quite damning actually on.
And he's right? If we think of any energy, it needs to be two things. It needs to be effective, right, and efficient.
Yes.
And hydrogen is neither. So actually, it's not a winner at all. So again, you're back to physics and chemistry. But it's just a part of that jigsaw rather than a major player. And it does have an area. There is a niche for it. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, another story we must talk about, because that's why we're here in the studio today. A report into regulation of the UK nuclear industry came out earlier this week. John Fingleton was appointed by the Prime Minister to lead a task force to set out a path to create affordable nuclear power generation in Britain and to do it more quickly. Well, the final report sets out some 47 recommendations. We won't go through them all, but amongst the top few, are there too many regulators and scrutinising authorities right now?
So it's not that there are too many organisations, because each of them has a valid role. It's the fact that the way in which each of them adds complexity and the way in which each of them in which they then together have a sort of cumulative effect. So one of the central recommendations we have is that we want to have a one-stop shop where all of these regulatory issues get sorted in one place, rather than having 5 or 6 different fora in which decisions are made in a non-coordinated way. So a system of lead regulation, essentially.
Just a question on the legal challenges. You and your team were clearly frustrated by the number of these, and you want a way to limit them. That sounds controversial. How would you do that?
Well, we've made a very modest suggestion. We've suggested that individuals who bring cases are protected at the moment. If you stop or delay a nuclear project and that costs hundreds of millions or billions, your liability is capped at £5,000, and that's to protect access to justice to people whose rights might be affected by something. We've suggested that limit should go up to £10,000, which I think is reflecting inflation since it was first set. And we've also suggested that if it goes to the Court of Appeal, it should double. We've suggested that if it's crowdfunded, that the limit should be based on the crowdfunded amount. And we've suggested that if a judge decides that the appeal was completely without merit, that they could disapply some of those protections. And we see that as just not limiting access to justice, but trying to introduce some balance into the system. And then we've also suggested that the government should underwrite the building of the continuation of the project pending judicial review, so that these judicial reviews do not stop the building of the project. And that's because if you stop the building of a nuclear project and the whole supply chain sort of stops building, that has a hugely costly implication for the industry and for the taxpayer and the consumer at the end of the day. And we've listed, I think, 7 judicial reviews that basically have been unsuccessful and that most part the court has said did not have strong merits. So these judicial reviews have been used to frustrate things rather than necessarily raise legitimate issues.
Now, the Prime Minister's on record as saying he wants to be builder, not a blocker. He wants to lead a government of builders, not blockers. Are you therefore optimistic that your report will be adopted by the government in full?
Well, I'm very hopeful. I mean, the government commissioned this report. They asked us to be radical. They've made a number of announcements about new nuclear projects. There's a nuclear renaissance internationally. You look at what the Americans and others are doing with nuclear. I think there's increasing recognition, given rising energy demand, the need for investment in technology, AI, quantum, and other technologies, that we're going to need huge increase in energy supply in the UK. Nuclear is has a huge role to play in that, but it needs to be far cheaper and far more efficient. So I think all of those create a lot of pressure on the government to actually get this right, and I would be hopeful that we've set a very ambitious timetable for implementation group that should monitor that implementation on schedule, and we'll know later today in the budget where the government stands on that. But my understanding is the government feels very fully committed to implement this.
I mean, my point about the blockers and the builders, the PM says he wants to be a builder, not a blocker. It sounds like this report is right up his street.
I was going to say, it's really, really positive, isn't it? I mean, there's someone saying, like, here's how you actually do it. Here's deregulation. Here's cutting through the core issues, which a lot of people say is red tape, is bureaucracy. It's a really clever way to get across your point, and I really hope it's taken seriously. I mean,
yeah, me too. I think he's absolutely total proponent, having read through the report this morning. I think, this would save billions for nuclear project building. So there's recently, I can't remember if it's size rolls C or B, whichever one it is. This is about £120 megawatt, so 12p per kilowatt hour, putting it in sort of household terms. That's much more expensive than onshore wind and gas power production. So to his point, it's very expensive. That's the red tape. Get rid of the red tape. Of course, it still needs to be, and what he's saying is not, and it's a free-for-all, let's organise it so there's a clear regulatory body with total accountability and responsibility for approving. Okay, and it does need to
do the work, but do it once. I think that's one of the points.
Exactly.
Do the work,
make
do
it
it
efficient.
Once. It's interesting. You and I exchanged a tweet from Robert Peston about this, which I think we can show it. We'll put it on the screen now. He's worried that actually, far from being accepted, this report might be
kicked down the can, kicked down the road.
Well, you know what government reports, they often just gather dust on shelves and bookcases, don't they? That would be not ideal. Let me put it no stronger than that, right?
I mean, this report did come out, and Robert tweeted this yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And so we got the budget focus today, so I suppose that they want to focus on this. I suspect, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But just to remind, I think Robert Peston's also a brilliant commentator, really economically sound. He's totally behind it, which makes me, think that's really valid. But just to remind everyone, this is going to increase our energy security by having nuclear power, which runs at a constant rate always. So it minimises our need to burn gas, doesn't get rid of it completely.
But it's pretty much exactly what we need, because people keep saying that the great thing about wind is we're producing or getting more of wind-powered electricity on the grid. And that is great, but it's not solving the issue, which is intermittency. And, that intermittency has been taken advantage of by traders, and those shock price spikes and trade houses profiting from it, that is the issue with wind. So if you increase the base load with nuclear, you reduce that more and more and more, and slowly you're getting there, right?
And you solve that intermittency with batteries and other
Get better at batteries.
Get better at batteries. But
that's another talking point.
The other key thing I want to come back on Robert's point of view there, and you saying kicking, and me saying kicking the can down the road, is this is great for UK economy.
Yeah.
And it's great for jobs.
Yeah.
So I suspect the government will pick up on it. Is my theory.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly,
and we'll encourage.
We'll certainly watch it and come back and report on what's happening. Some charts. How are we doing on the markets, Julian? What are you seeing on the various prices?
Let's get the charts up. That's a really good question. So the first one we got here, a week or so ago, we were looking at this chart and the government data. So the government are recording sort of about a third, actually more now, maybe 50% of forecourts across the UK. It's the government initiative launched about 2 or 3 years ago. That number here is in the left-hand corner, £1.45 spot 4p. That's last week's average price across the week, across about 5,000 forecourts in the UK.
To be clear, we said, I think we need to explain this because we've got the pump price estimate here.
That's our pump price.
This is the current pump price. So
yes,
a couple of weeks ago, we said this is going to go up to 151 if prices were going to hold there. They ended up dipping. And as you say, the average was lower, but we did get
so the average has moved up.
The average moved up and as expected. So this is a really good piece of free information for people to use, right? So fluxmarkets.co.uk. And then this, now what we're saying
now we're back down because of Ukraine and various other sort of like
we're looking like we're gonna head back down again, which is great news, as we said. But this shows the volatility, right? And it's it could be different again next week.
And in actual fact, if we look at government data for last night, it's at £1.46.5p, so 1p. That's $12 a tonne, 1p higher pump price across the UK. And we're saying now actually the real value is about £1.43. So we are absolutely
hold tight. If you can hold tight and not drive for a bit, you should save some money in a few weeks.
Fill up next week.
Delay that journey.
Fill up next week, right? And then the other thing
the gas
here,
numbers, I think.
Gas numbers coming up here. UK national balancing point. This Bloomberg chart. We're at 76p per therm. That's equivalent to about 2.5p per kilowatt hour, which is the number most people see. If you log on to your Octopus supply, you're probably going to see it at about 6p. But that number is coming down. And as you can see here, we're going back to last winter where numbers were double at the peak of winter last year. We're not seeing that same effect. Why? Because 2 weeks ago, we were talking about a much colder winter coming, but now they've dialed back on this. There's a big change in the stratosphere, and our gas guru here's just given me a download, and it went right above my head, literally, and in terms of science. But we're now expecting a more mild winter, but actually, so that's a factor here. But we've also got the Ukraine impact here, which also impacts gas prices. But the big one is LNG, so compressed natural gas from the States. We discussed this before,
And Qatar,
and are heading this way and filling the gap. And the US nat gas is much cheaper than our nat gas, but that even with LNG, freight and cost, because it is expensive to move it, that's helping compress prices here. So gas prices look like they're coming down. We're not going to have the same expense we had on our hands.
The government can take all the credit.
Yes.
Of course they will. Okay, thank you for the moment. This is the UK Energy Show, brought to you by Flux, the biggest news, information and trading platform for world energy markets, from Onyx Capital Group. Now, next, let's consider COP30, the outcome that was agreed. The bam, bam, bam chants you can hear there at the end of COP30 celebrated the successful agreement and establishment of the Belem Action Mechanism. What's that? Well, the chant was led by the activists and civil society organisations to demand concrete action on a global just transition away from fossil fuels. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to David Jones. He's the chief analyst from the energy data analytics think tank called Ember Energy. And I asked David whether he thought this year's COP meeting had achieved very much.
It achieved some things. Whether it was worth the effort of everyone getting together in quite the way they do is maybe another matter. I think a lot of it is how you lay out expectations in advance. I think people that went into it expecting to get a deal on phase out of fossils were probably going to be slightly naive to the kind of realistic outcome that might be expected from that. And I think to most observers on the ground, it was no real surprise that there wasn't a completely global agreement on that. What there was on that was some really good commitments or from governments to kind of step in to look at how to get off fossil fuels at a national level and to work with other countries on that, which is really exciting and kind of what needs to happen, and probably the only way that is going to actually happen.
Do you get a sense that almost despite COP, actually some of the scientists around the world and some of the forward-thinking businesses around the world are just getting on with this climate challenge and the move away from fossil fuels because they can see there's a buck to be made in investing in renewables, solar, wind, whatever it might be. And there's kind of progress being made almost despite what the politicians are arguing about.
Absolutely, and one of the biggest ironies when you look at COP is the blockers that Saudi Arabia put in the way, and then you look at the ground of what's happening in Saudi Arabia at the moment. Actually, they're one of the biggest installers of solar and battery anywhere in the world, as they look to expand that. So there are big differences in terms of what people are doing on the ground and what they're saying in that, and they work both ways.
China too, I think that could be applied to, isn't it? I mean, I know they're still polluting and I know they're still using a lot of coal, but they're also building solar with the graph almost going up vertically in terms of the amount of potential and the amount of capacity they're putting in place.
Yeah, this year's been, I have all the stories for this year in the global energy field. I think that the rise of solar and wind in China have been the main one. Over 2/3 of solar installed this year globally was in China. The same for wind. Everyone talks about solar in China, but China is also installing 2/3 of the wind with the wind capacity for this year as well, which is huge. There's a question to which extent they're then serious about bringing down emissions as well. So I think that what's clear now is that they're around about the peaking of emissions. Which is super cool, super exciting, and a huge step away from what's happened over the last 2 decades, where so much of the rise in emissions has come from as China has really seeked to develop. And what's really interesting now is to see where they might go with their own emissions trajectory, how quickly they carry on building out, how much they value efficiency that will actually lead to a reduction in fossil fuel use. I mean, it was interesting to see them at COP because actually then, although they're doing a lot of all of that stuff on the ground that's happening, they're not that engaged in trying to push the conversation further on phasing out fossil fuels. And so it's still uncertain quite how they sit within that. And I don't think that you can necessarily characterize all of their efforts as intended to be reducing CO2. They've obviously got half an eye to it, which is quite cool, and they are going in the right direction in so many ways, which is super positive. But now it's really about that trajectory that with over half of the world's coal use coming from China, how quickly can they start to get that down?
And just a thought about America. Trump wasn't there. American delegation wasn't there really to any large extent. Did that matter as it turned out?
If anyone was following the international maritime talks last month, and you could see how disruptive the US was being to try to tear apart that as a multilateral organization. Some of what happened behind the scenes reported in the FT was really quite scary and like bordering on gangsterism, and the actual mission from the COP talks to some extent didn't then get in the way of some other discussions. There were enough other people that wanted to veto a fossil fuel phase out with Russia and Saudi and others without the US needing to be the ones to take that onto their shoulders. So I see it as really quite useful. I think that it showed that multilateral, like when you look at how people are reporting back on COP, I think that there is a real sense and surprise that in this day and age, people even want to get around the table to talk to each other. So in some ways, people are reporting on this as a success in part of multilateralism. When it hasn't got the strong results from it, you kind of question how useful that is. But it's nice to see the multilateralism isn't completely dead in this day and age of Trump.
Could we just zoom right in on the United Kingdom just for a second? As we record our programme today, the budget hasn't been announced, but boy, oh boy, there's been enough rumours as to about what might be contained in it. If you had a wish list, David, what would you want the Chancellor to include in her measures, particularly relating to energy consumption and energy use?
I'm a simple person. I only have one wish. My wish is for cheaper electricity. I think that that what will come through some of the discussions within the budget will be around heat pump grants. There'll be around EV grants, which are very interesting. But really, if you're going to get people to want to heat their homes with electricity and drive with electricity, what you need is cheaper electricity in the first place. And what's happened within the UK as we've gone through the legacy, the way that we've built up the electricity industry and our pricing, we've ended up with all these kind of legacy costs added into electricity bills. And they're particularly crippling and leading to very high electricity prices. And there's no reason why, there's all sorts of reasons why they should be taken out of the electricity bill in themselves to lead back to actual more representative cost of what electricity costs today, which is substantially cheaper. And only by doing that are you really going to get the economics right, that people are going to want to think about heat pumps, EVs, and more critically, people can afford to heat their homes in the first place. And one of the kind of the alternatives is being discussed around VAT cuts and things like that really come back to in part come back to fairness and affordability. If you could other ways to make electricity cheaper, the fuel poverty is worst among people who heat their homes with electricity. Cutting electricity bills seems like the fairest option.
So that's it all done. Next time in Turkey, which is an interesting country, I looked it up. They still burn tons of coal for their energy, but they are going steaming ahead into solar, according to one analyst anyway. This year, was it a waste of time, money, energy going there?
I was going to say Turkey are huge diesel users though. And I think when we talk about fossil fuels, it's always on the forefront of everyday people's minds, isn't it? That it's the cars, and it's just like, that's on its way out, I think. I personally think it's not going to take too long. It's shifting focus to diesel usage for agriculture, for transport, proper transport, for road freight. And that's not going anywhere, I don't think, for the time being. And I think petrochemicals, plastics and all, that's got to be a new thing to figure out. So for me, it doesn't mean anything, to be honest. And I think actually, if anything, it's going to get worse and worse from Trump. As soon as he's done with Ukraine, Russia, if he is successful, he will turn his eyes, in my opinion, back to trade, global trade, and will want no restrictions. And I think the CBAM, the border adjustment mechanism, will be his focus. I think he's going to squeeze Europe to get rid of that kind of thing. And I think in general, COPs are under a lot of pressure. I don't even know if it will exist.
Barely relevant.
Barely relevant. But on the flip side, like everything we've just spoken about with nuclear and these proper progressive plans that actually seem actionable, that's how you do it, right? You don't all get together and talk about it. You just implement. And I think we are so far down the road that all the backlog of the last 5-6 years of investment will steadily come through and iterate. And I don't think there's any point in taking a backward step if these things are in motion. It's just trying not to go all in on 1 year, which is what, again, previous years we've tried to do. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think so. From what I studied and looked at was Ed Miliband's point of view, which is really, I mean, we have legislation to get to net zero, right? You've interviewed Richard Tice, who says, net stupid zero. Miliband's still very much on that progression to get to net zero, okay? And he's going to focus on job creation, and this is the right strategy to go. Now, those two things, as true as they might be, the big problem here is we're seeing, as we just saw on the gas price just now, that's 2.5p a kilowatt hour. Whereas at the moment, I've just changed my own personal power supply, electricity supply to Octopus on their Intelligent Go tariff. That's 30p at peak. It's it's more than 10 times more than the equivalent natural gas base cost, wholesale cost. So there's this big disparity. What I'm trying to say is there's a big disparity. All those policy costs coming to the power price, the electricity price. And so I think, Ed, and the government need to think about slowing down the transition. The transition's got to come. I'm a proponent for that. But they need to think about how they make this more equitable and slow it down.
By the time we meet again in a week, we'll know more about what's in the budget, which, as we record this, has still not happened. Oh, and by the way, you can see the Onyx hot take on the budget measures. Just search for the budget special from Flux News on YouTube. Lisa Aziz will have all the latest information about what the Chancellor said and didn't say. That'll be dropping on your feed around about 6 o'clock tonight at the time of publication. So thank you for watching the UK Energy Show. Don't forget to click the subscribe button so you never miss an edition of the show. Any thoughts or feedback, post in the comments below.